excited to be on stage with these wonderful panelists. And we're here to talk today about AAPI health and mental health and, what's coming up in the year 2025. So all of these folks on stage, work through therapy, through coaching, through some really innovative business and leadership approaches that are all investing in that are all investing in the whole person. How does identity, history, our emotions, how do systems all impact and shape health and mental health? And all of them are kind of reframing these issues to shape and improve outcomes on both the individual and the systemic level. And they're doing this in incredibly different ways. I would say that this is probably the most diverse panel that I have ever been on in my life. And I would be surprised if that's also true for my fellow panelists. And so I'm going to give them a chance to introduce themselves and share the incredibly creative and different ways they're approaching these issues. Why don't we start with you, Jeanie?
Sure, thank you. You can hear me. Okay. Jeanie Chang. I am by training a licensed mental health clinician, also executive leadership coach, author, and corporate speaker, or I should say workplace speaker on workplace mental health and intergenerational mental health. So what I do, I think is unique. So I would say 20% of my work is, of course, clinical. I like to stay with that and mainly specialize in grief and trauma. But the other 80% of my work is actually speaking in workplaces, nonprofits, corporates, universities, promoting workplace mental health, because that's where we spend a lot of time, and Asian mental health and identity. So when I think that was the next gen panel that I loved hearing about the storytelling, how I incorporate that in my work to promote more conversations on mental health and break that stigma surrounding mental health, which not just exists in our community, by the way, is I bring in Korean dramas. I was watching A-drama, Korean dramas, Korean like TV show. I started bringing them in because and this was pre-pandemic actually, because I wanted to break the ice. There we go. Oh God. Okay, there's a difference. Whoa. Okay, I'll talk a little softer. So yeah, I started bringing in K-dramas, Korean language TV shows, because I wanted to break the ice. It's not easy talking about your well-being, right? It's gotten a lot easier, and we can talk about what that looks like today. But when you talk about a story that you're watching, that I would say is a good form of escapism, and something that's very externalized, which is a term in psychology where you can externalize someone else's story that's not yours but still relate to it. It made it much more easier for me to bring it into the workplace. Yes, corporate America, corporate Korea, I will bring in K-drama clips. And I say, look back here when I'm speaking, and I'll show these clips outlining things like grief and then workplace bullying and abuse, stuff that's really difficult to talk about. But when you kind of show a clip, it makes it much easier. So that's how I bring in storytelling, and we can talk more about how that looks today because it's definitely shifted in the pandemic. But the other thing that I'm seeing, especially in mental health, because there is a stigma, we've made such inroads. This is 2025, but the concern now today, we're in I would say, a contentious political landscape to talk about mental health. So I feel a little bit, feel like we went backwards right now. And that's just me being honest, because especially in our community with the pandemic crisis, in the midst of crisis came opportunity to talk about things like race, identity, and mental health and how that directly correlates with your well-being. And so my hope is that still elevating these stories. I happen to use K-dramas because they're my form of self-care. But there's many things you can use to talk about that. So that's a little bit about the work I do. And I'm glad the mic works now. Thanks.
Go ahead, Shu.
Right. So my name is Shu Li. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of a medical group in New York City called Rendr. Before I get started on what I do and what is that I do that is related to AAPI Health, I just want to echo what Jeanie said. I definitely do watch K-drama too. And I would love to discuss with anyone the most recent K-drama showings on Netflix. Yes, anytime. All right. So For those of you, I'm pretty proud that the name Rendr has been more known. I start my self introduction with Renders because this is the primary reason why I think invited to join this panel, because it is a medical group. It serves up to 200,000 mostly Asian American patients in New York City, in the boroughs of Manhattan, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. And I would say of these 200,000 patients, maybe about 80% are actually Chinese American. So we do have a population focus there. And the kind of care or the relationship, how I contribute to healthcare is more at a population health level, more so than an individual level. So at Rendr, we also offer mental health services. So I definitely resonate with what Jeanie has said about both the scarcity sometimes of the access of the services, as well as sometimes the stigma of seeking care, seeking self-care, seeking mental health services. So all of what we do, I believe, is important. So at Rendr, for example, we take care of, I would call maybe 150,000 patients that are signed up or attributed in our province, attributed to our primary care physicians or providers, right? So we are the primary care providers for them. And we have the responsibility of really watching out not for their sickness, but equally or maybe sometimes more importantly for their health. So how do we prevent bad things from happening? How do we keep them healthy longer? How do we give them more health years? How do we make their hospital stay shorter? How do we make their transitions from the hospital back to home, back to the community easier? These are all the things that we think about, and these are all the things that actually does require a pretty substantial infrastructure in place, both in terms of clinical expertise, in terms of operational processes and standardization, in terms of data systems. So like the last panel on AI, those are things that we explore as well. How can we do things at a larger scale better and more efficiently? So anyway, I look forward to discussing with the panelists today on how we think about or work toward AAPI health. Wow, I'm so impressed. Hi, I'm Shinhee Han. I have been a clinician for the last 30 plus years, and my role has expanded just vicariously over the decades by teaching at Columbia's race and ethnicity department, writing with David Eng, who's at Penn, on racial melancholia and racial dissociation. We're much more, I would say my practice is much more psychodynamic, psychoanalytic, theoretical framework. My practice is mainly with Asian Americans. And it's been a delight to be in love with so many of my students and patients, and I look forward to sharing some stories together. Yeah.
And Shinhee is also the author of an incredible book that was very well reviewed in the New Yorker, if I may brag on your behalf, and it is over there. And I'm Ariana Lee. I'm a producer at NPR for a show called NPR's Embedded, and I am also a board member for the Asian American Journalists Association right here in New York. One thing we all have in common is that we all encounter through our work beliefs that resist change, deeply entrenched beliefs, whether, in some of our families that might have been therapy is for other people, Americans, or it might be that providers know best, right? So I'm really curious to hear from each of you. What's a belief that you've encountered in your work that's been really hard to challenge, and how have you gone about challenging that? Let's go in the other direction. Sydney, let's start with you.
Um, well, mine is much more internal, so it's not necessarily external. And, I think that when people finally seek therapy, there's a lot of stereotypes that go against therapy when it comes to Asian Americans. But I think that what I've been really working with a lot of people has less to do with the external stereotypes than the internalized beliefs, such as suffering is normal. tolerating. In Korean, it would be called chana, and that's normal. That's being a good girl. That's being strong. I am really weak if I can't resolve my own issues. And they're often alienated and isolated in their suffering. They dismiss themselves. So there's been a lot of talk about giving narratives about their own stories. They don't think that your story is important. They don't even have a story because they think about, well, my parents came here to help me get good education and now I have a good job, but I'm suicidal because I hate it. I never ask myself, what do I like? What do I want to do? What are my interests? And I think that that kind of suffering and the awakening is one of the hardest things to arrive at in therapy.
And when you are working with clients, what are some of the ways that you go about sort of interacting with people that are dealing with some of those beliefs?
I think really the process, one of the things I think Jeanie would maybe agree is that when somebody comes to therapy, I have no idea how long it will take. I have no idea what will go into. People often come in, and especially people who are in corporate America, which I'm not so used to, but they say, okay, I want to get my money's worth. I have this many sessions I'm thinking about. I want to fix A, B, C. So how can we get there? And I say, I don't know. And, I invite you to play with me. Somebody used that word a lot in AI. I invite you to be curious with me. I invite you to be vulnerable together because vulnerability is where we can begin to look within. I mean, 95% of us is unconscious. So when people come into therapy, we're talking, I get to hear maybe 5%, but that 5% that I could hear in the consciousness is also organized and chosen by you what you're going to talk about. So to get underneath and get into the unconscious takes a lot of trust, takes a lot of giving oneself a chance at this process that is so unknown and mysterious. And they say, well, when am I going to be done? I say, well, you'll kind of feel it and you'll feel like you have wings on your back, and then we say, okay, go fly, see you later. And but some people come for 6 months and they're like, ooh, I get it, I'm gonna go and do it. Some people come for 5 years, they're like, no, I still want to be here. So it's really individualized, but the magic is that it's so mysterious and not one single person is the same, but there is a common thread, I think, especially for Asian Americans and Asian American women, particularly, of being good girls. And then you're stuck. And I ask you, whose guilt are you carrying? Whose shame are you carrying? What are your tears saying to you? Are you listening? Is your life about what should I be doing? Should. Do you ask yourself, what do I want to do? What do I want to? What are my desires? And so those are some of the things that I really try to bring in because we are all Asian American model minorities, and that mandates perfect assimilation, that mandates you to be very cognitively aware, but emotionally dormant. And when children are young and the parents really award children to be cognitively advancing, we're not necessarily thinking about what has to give, what's being sacrificed. And it's often the psychological and the emotional development. So when there is such a disparity That's when people fall into anxiety, depression, panic attacks, dissociations, and that's when they
And one of the amazing things that happens in your book is you're pulling on, alongside your collaborator, decades of seeing patients in school settings, or I guess I should say students, clients, and seeing how there's sort of this systematic way that the narrative about self-sacrifice repeats itself. My grandparents sacrificed when they immigrated, and now my parents sacrifice by going forward into, let's say, corporate America, so that I can continue sacrificing. And that some of that is like breaking the cycle. And then I think, shoot, from a different perspective, you're working on a systems level and you're encountering different kinds of entrenched beliefs, doing something really hard without even the AAPI angle of like supplying primary care, right? And then doing that within this population. So can you just talk about some of the beliefs you've encountered and
Yeah, happy to. So I'll draw on examples from really my work. Since Rendr formed a little over 5 years ago, we have grown, I would say, fourfold, fivefold, from a initial medical group of 27 different clinics to today more than 100. From originally 50 providers to today 250. From 300 employees to today 5 times that. So I would call this journey both in terms of its, I guess, the path or the history of corporate development, as well as the way that we actually provide care, is a constant, nonstop change and transformation. So for those of you that are familiar with change journeys, how do you do transformations in companies? You know that it's never easy because every day is about learning something new, fighting, resisting, or accepting or embracing something new, or eventually just having to do things a different way. So I can see these changes both from our patients as well as from our employees, our providers. On the patient end, I can't talk about them all as just one entity with one mindset and one set behaviors. For example, age matters. One thing that we did at Rendr was we automated our phone system so that we thought that if you say press 1 for Cantonese, press 2 for Mandarin, press 3 for English, people would appreciate that. And then you say press 1 to make an appointment to, right? But it turns out that a lot of the elderly patients don't like that because one, they don't like not having to talk to someone immediately upon getting connected. And two, they find it confusing because they forgot what the manual was. So if they listen to all of it, they have to come back again, right? So they complain about these things and they tell this to their primary care docs and their office managers, who then told us, we're like, that's not right, like basically counterintuitive in some way. But rather than say, why can't you move forward with this? We say, this might be something we can accommodate, right? Is there a way for us to be more age sensitive or age centric? But then on the other hand, sometimes we do try to urge patients to adopt new things, such as during COVID. They definitely do need to get on apps to do televisits. They can't all come to the office, right? And so during that time, how do you do it? When you have all these patients who are not familiar with their iPhones or their app downloads, basically every office receptionist had to say, okay, you don't know how to do it, take out your phone. Okay, let me see what phone you have. Okay, let's download this. And the biggest hurdle to downloading that app so that they can do televisit is the fact that they have an iPhone, but they don't know what their Apple ID is. Right? So then they have to call their children and say, what is my Apple ID? So such is the, I guess, the change journey, how to get over it. But once we got over that hurdle, then things got a little bit easier. It just requires enormous amount of patience. Right. So then thinking about me. I can help you with that. Yeah, me too. Me too. So on the other hand, for our render team, the change is always there. For example, doctors may say, this is how I always saw patients and took care of patients. But now you ask me to do different things. I mean, part of it is the administrative burden of practicing medicine in America today. That is a more environmental or systemic issue more than an organizational issue. But they would say that, right? But then the reaction, my reaction usually is like, wherever you know internally, even if you don't want to admit it, that your approach is not openness to some change request. There is resistance. And I would encourage our teams to look into that and say, what is the issue and what is the resistance and what is this openness? What does that mean? And so at Rendr, every week, Monday morning, when we have a batch of new employees come, when we have new employee orientations, I do always try to spend 10, 15 minutes with them talking about some of the tips I learned along the way, or at least that would work in this organization. And so being open, growth mindset is always one thing that I say, because I do feel in healthcare, the professionals in our industry, they really have a lot to adapt to juggle. Just to maybe get the daily work done, it's already a tremendous amount of work, let alone all these changes in policy. Right now, for example, what would happen with, let's say, hypothetically, Medicaid funding cut? What would that mean for our Medicaid patients? What would that mean for their social care needs? What would that mean for their screening needs, for their prevention, et cetera? So these are all things we think about, and we encourage openness, at least to be receptive, to listen to what the other side has to say. So I would just say that's a continuous process, but in that process, which is partly why I feel fortunate to be on this panel, I think the healthcare professionals do have definitely very serious burnout and mental health needs. And that's something that I think that we just need to think more about and do more for.
Yeah, in some ways, like with the intensity of change, some of the ways of meeting that is actually through social capital and like creating teams and interactions and social technology that can basically help people cope with that. And Jeanie, you have, I think, one of the most like out of the box approaches that I've heard so far, and I'm really curious to hear more about K dramas. I think that's pretty much like telling what everyone else is thinking too. So go ahead.
No, I love seeing people smile when I say K dramas, but I really brought them in, like I said earlier, to break the ice and make and have these conversations that are tough, because I like to challenge and I like to say, well, are you really okay? Or why, like, how are you feeling? What are you feeling? It's okay to be feel what you're feeling. I really loved how Shinhee said it's very internal. It is. We look at ourselves first and go, should I be feeling this upset? Should I be feeling sad? So a lot of my work is actually emotions 101, saying if you're feeling sad, you're feeling sad. If you're feeling angry or full of rage, which I saw a lot during anti-Asian hate, I said, it's okay, you feel rage. My concern as a therapist is what you do with those emotions, how you navigate those emotions. Why I brought in Korean dramas, which we can talk about. We'll talk about that over lunch, what you're watching. But I brought them in because then I could say, hey, look at this scene of a mother who's yelling at her child or adult child about how they're not good enough. And I use that typical scene where it really triggers us, right? You're not good enough. This is not. So what if you're a CEO and done all this? You're still disappointing the family. And then I ask them to look at that scene and who you relate to. And then and then I tell them, look at the next scene where you see the mother who just might have screamed at her child and it triggers all of us. And then you see the mother bawling her eyes out. And that is why I brought the stories in, because you see the multidimensional, multifaceted experiences that we otherwise don't get to see technically in real life, because we don't have these conversations, perhaps with our parents, like, hey, what are you really feeling? Oh, and then you see the mom and the K drama say, I yelled at my daughter because obviously I want her to do better than me. We know that, I guess, at our core, but we don't have those conversations. So a lot of my work is the term intergenerational. You know that term. We talk a lot about intergenerational trauma. I also talk about intergenerational trauma, intergenerational resilience, intergenerational mental health, intergenerational workplace mental health. So we're talking Gen Zs, millennials, Gen X. So I'm a Gen X. I like to say that because how I even see things as a Gen Xer matters. And then we have the baby boomers. And we all approach mental health differently. And I make that very clear, especially when I'm in the workplace saying, hey, you are a senior level manager, an executive. So you're in this upper bracket. How you see your well being, or whether you want to talk about how you're feeling today or the stress of life is very different than a Gen Z just starting the workplace where they want to have these conversations. So a lot of my job is kind of neutralizing that territory to have, because I'm at the core, I'm a licensed family therapist. I see things familiarly, where it's all about the system. One emotional unit. One workplace is one emotional unit, whether you like it or not, right? How your boss is feeling or how the boss is acting trickles down, vice versa, employees impacting each other. And then if we're talking clinically, the family, the core, all those internal beliefs in our Asian families of, the term filial piety, that duty to family, so exists. I see that even if someone is like a third, fourth generation, because intergenerationally we're impacted. So the stories that I bring in, why I kind of went unconventional, because I really want to be unconventional and have these conversations of going, well, first of all, it's okay to not be okay. That's a K-drama, by the way. It's okay to not be okay. And then what does that look like? Because normalizing mental health, by the way, is an everyday, every moment thing. We're not talking mental illness, which is very specific. We're talking mental health, your emotional well-being, social and psychological well-being. So every moment, every day. So I try to have these conversations and bring in a clip going, hey, there's this person crying in the workplace. What's going on? I'm not saying I want you to cry in the workplace. I'm just saying I want you to validate that your emotional experience is very much real. So that's why I love that term chamo. I don't love that term in the way of it's good to do, but in Korean, it's like suffer silently, quiet. And I actually try to radically change that and going, actually, you're like a simmering pot that's about to overflow and boil over, and that's not healthy. And then I bring in a clip to go, hey, you want to see this example? So that's what I do. Yeah.
That's really fascinating. I mean, it makes me wonder also about some of like the limits with this tool that you've encountered as well. Because sometimes you watch TV and it's like from a very basic mental health standard, it's an unattainable beauty standard, or it's a very neat and tidy resolution of a conflict. And so, how are you dealing with that kind of gap between real life and fiction?
Yeah. So raise your hand if you've seen a K-drama, or you watch them. Oh my goodness, I love that. That's so cool. Do you know that 98% is written by women? I'm bringing that up because those women writers really know how to bring out the emotionality, and I'm bringing that up not because I'm female, just saying they can bring out that emotion and display it. Now, I always tell people, please separate the scenario of the drama. It's a drama. So, yes, not everybody's going to drive around in a Maserati and then whisk you away to wherever and give you a black credit card and you can spend money. No, that's all the scenario. Well, that's why we watch it. But really, what's realistic are the emotional experiences of the characters. What the writers do so well, the Korean drama writers, is focus on the people. That's what K-dramas do really well. So people, you and me relate to people. And that's why we find such relatability. Even if the scenario is off the wall, we still relate to that person, whether they're weeping because of tragic circumstances or jumping for joy because of something they worked hard for that they saw come to fruition. So that's how I separate it. I kind of say, hey, don't look at the actual scenario. It's kind of unique for a North Korean soldier, talking about crash landing, coming to South Korea and all that stuff. Yes, unrealistic, but not the relationship, not the camaraderie, not the bromance, not the struggle, and not even the resilience, and not even, these are all universal themes and messages. Mental health, I would say, is a universal language, and that's what we see embedded in there, and that's what the writing does so well. So that's why I say separate that. By the way, there's always a moderate term of watching. I always say a dose of a K-drama. So that's like one episode, which is an hour. And I always tell people, I'm not justifying you to binge and then come to work like a zombie and like you can't function. That's not what I'm saying. But I do say escapism is really important to manage your stress. It's very important. So we need that. So what are you doing to escape? I want you to escape, but I want you to come back. I'm not asking you to escape your life. I'm asking you to escape momentarily to live your best life when you come back. That's how I use K-dramas in the storytelling. And I'll find it fascinating that thanks to Squid Game, if you watch Squid Game, I don't necessarily endorse it for your mental health, but I will say it did kind of catapult K-dramas to a global level. Because of that drama, though, I'm able to talk about it in every sector. And it doesn't matter if you've never seen one. I'm not there to convince you to watch. I'm just there for you to see a scenario that you may relate to and because of the emotional experience, because it's people, focusing on people, and then be able to translate it into your own life and then take those key lessons and translate it. So at the end of the day, I'm not asking you to watch, I'm asking you to watch, learn, and apply. So hopefully I answered your question.
No, you did. You did great. So, okay, before we start to pivot to Q&A, I do have a more serious question, which is, right now we're going through a moment where the Trump administration is facilitating a coordinated attack on DEI initiatives. We have people being disappeared, immigrants being disappeared, even for those of us who have more privilege, crossing borders or, helping their families who may not be citizens through this moment is incredibly scary. And as a journalist, I think that I'm very aware that there are a lot of journalists speaking up in this moment about how speech has generally been chilled around issues pertaining to race, identity, and inclusion. And, I'm curious about what's the most important way that this climate is impacting your work. And yeah, feel free, any of you, to jump in on that.
I think, in academia, in the humanities, there have been a lot of Asian Americans who have been hired to be because of DEI and to teach ethnic courses, to teach Korean history, Chinese, Asian American history. And many of them were curious to find out whether they're being tenured or they're being cut. Okay, so it's actually happening all around. Or when I used to teach and there were protests, they would say, don't talk about ABC or Lego. So there's constant messages, right? And I'm thinking about anger as a productive usage. Audre Lorde talks about how we can transform guilt into productive anger to bring people together to create a community and create and take action on activism. And that can happen at your kitchen table. That can happen in school. That can happen in your workplace. And one of the ways that psychoanalyst and professor in English, Michelle Stevens, talks about is that as black and whites argue out, blacks say to the white people, you are a racist. And the white person says, yes, I am a white racist, but I can't do anything about it. And what does the Asian American do? Asian Americans see themselves as adjacent to white, but not good enough and feel too guilty to be black, adjacent to black. So they're stuck in the middle as the middleman. And I think that one of the things that Michelle Stevens really advocates is we need to get next to each other, just like how we're sitting next to each other. And in Beef, if you watch the show, at the end, Danny and Amy are lying next to each other and they're high, but they're like talking and they exchange, identities. But what I would say about Asian Americans is that we know how to get next to everyone else except ourselves. And I urge you to get next to yourselves and then get next to a friend and then see how we can mobilize, how we can really share the anger together to build something that's actually useful. So that, is part of mental health actually, because when we get next to ourselves, we become compassionate. When we talk to a friend, we become compassionate and empathetic together. And then the next person and the next person. Hence, a group is born.
I just have a very brief comment or maybe follow up on that. So in my community professionally, we have predominantly Asian Americans or Chinese Americans, right? So in this environment, especially after COVID, we've already experienced the hate, the violence, etc. So I think people are gradually coming out of it and healing. But now we face another potential damage.
coming at us. So I feel like this time of coming together is really the best way for us to say, hey, well, we're not just us. We're not just living on this one street, one block. We cannot retreat to our old, I guess, territory and just be like that. This is a process about us feeling like we matter, and mattering really matters to all of us in terms of being healthy and productive members of society. So what I see is sometimes in this environment, there are more applications from uh, foreign graduate students because they need more opportunities when the opportunities are shrinking. So we do our best to help.
And one thing I think that's particularly interesting in your area, Shu, is that, some of these attacks are coming in the name of efficiency, right? And your work is sort of like trying to improve efficiency. And so like, what's the difference between these efficiencies and how are you kind of meeting that challenge?
Um, I really think people are using these words very drastically differently. And so I try not to mix them up. So to us, really, if we are able to look at individuals on an individual basis, for example, or see people as they are and understand what is really intrinsic intrinsic value to every human being, um, then really that is the foundation. I mean, efficiency or no, productivity or no, that's really how we can, I guess, how each of us can really optimize what we bring to the world and what we can do as we go in the world.
Add something real quick. Yeah. Right now, folks are discouraged. And I would say it's okay to be discouraged. There was a lot of inroads, especially DEI, mental health fell under that. When there were the wellness programmings at work, EAPs fell under DEI. So a lot of the folks that I worked with in very large corporations, it's sad that they're not there anymore. But so right now, folks are discouraged. But here's the hope. 'Cause I like to look things at as you have to reframe things for the sake of your own mental health. That I want to say is particularly in our community, the API community, much stronger now. Thanks to what they experienced, like I said, in the time of crisis and tragedy, there's always opportunity for change. And so, what I'm seeing within our community that I didn't see perhaps 5 years ago, this had happened 5 years ago, is they are stronger. They are leveraging their angst and anger in a way that I'm seeing that is productive, and we want to make sure it continues to stay that way. So that's the hope, meaning people are elevating their voices for each other. Social media, and as a Gen Xer, I'm also sometimes a little hesitant being on all the social media, but I find it rewarding in the sense of people do find those allies on social media. I've seen it in a way that can be so powerful, and particularly now as people are speaking up and standing firm, going, okay, we're in a new era. We've come so far. It's a little bit, maybe we took a few steps back, but we can keep moving as a community post COVID. And what have we learned from 2020 to 2023? Very, very intense, especially in my work in Asian mental health. But the hope, I do see a lot of hope. And I do see a lot of folks going, okay, let's just keep talking. Let's just keep talking. And this is hard. And I love the fact that they're saying, I'm not doing well. Maybe like 5 years ago, people wouldn't say that. They'd be like, no, I'm good. Right? The whole saving face and making sure you're showing face. But now it's more like, okay, here's my real face. I'm trying to be strong. But yeah, I'm anxious. And I'm like, that's okay. We are in a time of change, but move forward. Right?
Thank you so much. Do we have time for one? No.
They're like, no.
Two questions. One question.
One question.
Oh, I don't have. I'm good. Okay. I mean, I can ask questions all day. I literally ask questions for a living. But I think it's time for your questions. Should we? Is there? Oh, okay, great. Yeah. Okay. So questions.
Any questions?
I guess why not? Thank you. This is very insightful. My father is a psychiatrist. And so growing up, I still am his guinea pig. so to speak. So I'm curious in terms of allyship. We talked a lot about, the AAPI experience. So I wonder in your line of work, if you also encountered, because at the end of the day, someone earlier said, I think it was Cindy, that we are more similar than we thought we're different. So I'm curious in your line of work if you've been approached for building coalition in a individual level, and what are your thoughts on that?
I'll answer that first, and then okay. So I'm glad you asked that question. Um, Allyship, I am also strongly encouraged by. So if you know the globalization of anything with the K in front of it these days, K culture, K dramas, K pop, K beauty. So in my own world as a second generation Korean American, what has helped my own mental health is it's a double edged sword. The fascination with K dramas now can be a double edged sword, but I'm going to talk about it in a positive spin where I see folks very curious about Asia thanks to K pop and K dramas, more interested in what's going on politically in parts of Asia that I never saw even 5 years ago. And we had some things happen in South Korea that I happened to be right after something that happened, impeachment, if you weren't there, martial law. An impeachment, and I was bringing folks over. I host K drama tours. That's a side note. I host K drama tours, and they're healing tours. And folks were from the U.S. on my tour during that time and seeing the protests. And I was nervous, going, "Oh, they're seeing some protests." Now in Korea, they have peaceful protests. They're loud, but nothing really bad happens, quote unquote. And the encouragement was so fascinating that they were already pretty abreast of all the terms and they knew what was happening. Meaning, folks are curious enough. That to me is allyship. You're curious. I think we talked about that. Questioning things, going, hey, what's going on in South Korea? Because I do love their content and figuring things out and knowing that they go, oh, this is peaceful protesting, Jeanie. And I'm like, okay, so you already knew that. What I'm trying to say is that the knowledge out there, the thirst for knowledge and curiosity has helped that allyship. And in my world with K dramas, that's elevated it. Thanks to that, people going, what is this? What's this culture showing? Oh, I like the family value. So the very things that I had angst with growing up are the very things I'm finding people love. Non-Asians love of Korean dramas and Korean culture and Asian culture in general that is bringing us closer to them. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Um, I don't know if you know Holly Lee, who's the founder of Asian Women Giving Circle in New York. She just published her first book, The Big We. I recommend that everyone read it because it's exactly about building allyships and carrying out our missions. So she founded it 20 years ago. I'm one of the members. And what we found out is that in New York City, Asian Americans have the highest disparity in income. They are the wealthiest and they're the poorest. And so all the philanthropy money that's raised in New York City, less than 3% are funded for Asian American concerns. In that 3%, less than 1% go to women and girls. And so we, at our kitchen tables, we just started talking about it. And Holly said, let's do something. And it actually started with us being in a cat, this Korean thing, where we put money together and then we would go for a nice lunch and buy jewelry and computers, whatever. But then we're like, well, why don't we put it in together? And we're like, oh my God, why not? And so we have chosen as our mission Asian American women in New York who do make art incorporating their social justice and social equity. And so we have, over the last 20 years, funded 1.5 plus $1 million to so many grantees. And I would say that our group are like ladies who age from 25 to 85. And it's just a really easygoing, goofy group. And we like to go to our grantees' shows or their book readings or documentary screenings. And we do our best to raise money for them. And that's allyship. And that can happen in your kitchen table. And this is where we can come together. And women in particular are really good at it. So I really encourage you, whatever your concern might be, invite a few friends and start talking and see if you can start giving support.